In 2018, Virgil was appointed men's artistic director at Louis Vuitton, making him the first black designer to hold such a position at the French luxury house. For anyone who'd been following the trajectories of both Virgil and Kanye, this announcement landed like a bomb, because this wasn't just any job, this was the job that Kanye had desperately been chasing for years. He was, after all, named the Louis Vuitton Don. All the way back in 2009, Kanye had made his first major deal with Louis Vuitton when he had designed a shoe collection for the brand. I remember having a fake pair of these back when I was in school, it was popping. And in 2016, Ye was supposed to finally take over as the company's creative director, replacing Kim Jones, the very same designer Ye had put on years earlier, back when he had hired him to work on his pastel label. It would have been a full circle moment, and even Kim himself reportedly recommended Ye for the job, and word was, Louis Vuitton had agreed the position was actually his.
Bernard Arnault offered me a deal after the Yeezy Season 1 show to support the Kanye West brand, because we had had 4 billion impressions, and it was the biggest fashion show of all time, like bigger than Victoria's Secret, bigger than Chanel. So Bernard Arnault had a meeting with me and looked me eye to eye and shook my hand and said, I'm going to do the Kanye West line.
This was happening during a time when Kanye's Yeezy brand with Adidas was already exploding in popularity, revolutionizing both the sneaker market and Ye's bank account. His shoes were selling out instantly, reselling for thousands, and turning him into one of the most successful designer entrepreneurs in the fashion industry. But despite building what would eventually become a billion-dollar empire with Yeezy, Kanye still craved legitimacy from the fashion's old guard. No amount of commercial success seemed to satisfy his desire for acceptance from the elite fashion world that had long dismissed him. But then, the 2016 breakdown happened.
To give y'all my truth, even at the risk of my own life, even at the risk of my own success, my own career, I've been sent here to give y'all the truth. Jay-Z called me, bro.
Unfortunately for Ye, this now infamous public meltdown spooked LV execs so badly that they would end up hitting the brakes. Kim Jones was asked to stay on board a little longer, and Ye's dream was quietly put on ice. But by 2018, LV was finally ready to make a decision, but by then, things had changed. Behind closed doors, they decided that Ye was too unstable to represent the brand, and instead, they handed the role to his closest protege, Virgil, a man who by all accounts was one of Kanye's closest friends, someone who had seemingly been quietly watching, learning, and maybe even plotting all along. And just when you think it couldn't get more cold-blooded, Virgil would hit Kanye with a call, allegedly just a few minutes before the news broke online, to let him know he had just taken the job that Kanye had spent almost 2 decades chasing. And then, when Virgil finally made his debut for Louis Vuitton at Paris Fashion Week, the crowd was psyched. But in the middle of all the hype, there was Kanye, front row, tears streaming down his face as he embraced his former protege at the end of the runway. Most people at the time probably saw this as a mentor overcome with pride at his student's success, but was Ye crying tears of joy, or was he mourning the dream that had secretly been snatched from him? The dark truth, like most things with Kanye, is probably all of the above. In that moment, he seemed to embody the conflict at the core of their relationship, formed from years of friendship and camaraderie, but also fierce competition, and ultimately jealousy and betrayal, as Kanye himself would later admit. At Louis Vuitton, it was impossible to deny Virgil's commercial impact. For one, his pieces were flying off the shelves fast, but also, Virgil's history of combining streetwear and high fashion helped LV reach a younger demographic while maintaining its prestige positioning. And while Ye's Yeezy shoes with Adidas were undeniably crushing it at the time, his broader fashion ambitions, particularly with the Yeezy clothing, was still hitting roadblocks after LV curved him and embraced Virgil instead. However, as time went on, it became clear that even after reaching the pinnacle of success, Virgil never grew out of his copy and paste habits, and as we'll soon see, it was only a matter of time before this habit would eventually catch the attention and ire of other fashion creators. The first major heat Virgil caught for alleged plagiarism came shortly after his debut runway collection with Louis Vuitton, but the allegations concerned his own brand Off-White. In July 2018, Norwegian sportswear brand Helly Hansen sued Off-White for jacking their trademark diagonal stripe pattern that they had been using for 40 years, demanding Off-White destroy all products with those stripes and pay them damages. Some Virgil fans tried to dismiss the lawsuit, pointing out that diagonal stripes are common in fashion, but this missed the point entirely. The issue wasn't just about stripes, it was about Virgil's habit of constantly lifting existing designs with minimal changes and passing them off as a revolutionary. So while his supporters would claim his genius was in repackaging ideas with an unmatched intensity, it was impossible to shake off the fact that this was laziness at best and theft at worst. Because if you strip away the buzzwords and industry jargon like repackaging and recontextualization, what you're left with is a designer who built his career largely on other people's ideas. Even as the controversies piled up though, Virgil's carefully crafted persona as a trailblazer of fashion helped deflect the criticism. But for those paying attention, a troubling pattern was becoming impossible to ignore, as later that same year, Virgil would also be accused of copying an earlier off-white design from the artist Luco Fontana, the inventor of an art movement known as spatialism, who Virgil admitted to being a fan of. The following year, in 2019, Virgil would allegedly steal from a young artist named Punk Zek, with Punk's mother Michelle Ellie calling out Virgil for copying her son's designs after they had met at his Paris presentation. But Virgil would brush off these accusations by framing his approach to design as part of streetwear's rich tradition of sampling and remixing. To some, this defense was basically a masterclass in having your cake and eating it too, because unlike music, where samplers pay for clearance, or fine art, where appropriation is explicitly acknowledged as commentary, Virgil seemed to want it both ways, taking freely from others while building up his reputation as an innovative designer, and surprisingly, the fashion industry still ate it up. However, about a year later, Virgil would find himself knee-deep in another controversy, this time with Belgian designer Walter van Beirendonck, who again would straight up call out Virgil for directly copying patterns and designs from his fall 2016 collection, and this time using them in his Louis Vuitton Spring-Summer 21 collection. Both designs featured men's suits in primary colours with figure lines attached to the front of the jackets. Van Beirendonck would blast Virgil in the Belgian media, essentially calling him a talentless hack who couldn't create an original design to save his life. He would go even further as throwing a jab on Instagram with an outfit that simply read, "I hate copycats." In response, Virgil would claim his Louis Vuitton collection was inspired by the brand's own 2005 menswear show under Marc Jacobs, not Van Beirendonck's work. But fashion insiders quickly noted that the similarities to Van Beirendonck's designs were far more striking to any connection to LV's archive. The controversies would continue in 2021 when Walker Wear, a streetwear brand that had been dressing hip-hop royalty since the early 90s, would file another lawsuit against Off-White for allegedly plagiarizing their logo. According to the lawsuit, Virgil replicated a jacket design that they'd been using for almost 30 years and slapped a price tag of over $2,000 onto it. It seemed that there was an all-too-familiar pattern with Virgil's work, often feeling like a sophisticated game of spot the reference. But interestingly, when most designers get caught copying like this, they hide, deny the allegations, or even lawyer up. But Virgil didn't do any of that. Instead, he developed an entire philosophy around appropriation, essentially turning plagiarism into a whole design style. He called it the 3% rule, the idea that you only need to change something by 3% to make it your own.
Then I have my sort of like 3% approach. Right now, I'm only interested in editing something 3% from its original form. I'm basically tired. It might be too old, but...
Virgil would also compare himself to a DJ sampling music or a hip-hop producer chopping up old records, repeatedly defending his methods by saying his strength was in selection and recontextualization rather than pure creation. Now, this approach might work fine for an art school thesis, but when you're charging over $2,000 for a hoodie with someone else's design elements, things can get murky real fast. But just like with the time of Pyrex Vision, Virgil just didn't seem to care. And while his design fraud game was a hotly debated topic on the fashion scene for years, Ye's silence was deafening, at least until Virgil tragically lost his battle to cancer in 2021, at which point Kanye would finally break his silence, with all that hurt and bitterness that he'd kept inside eventually exploding out into the public eye. Years following Virgil's Louis Vuitton appointment, Kanye would maintain a public front of support for his former mentee. In fact, Kanye would consistently express pride in seeing someone from his circle achieve what had once seemed impossible for black designers, even though he was hurt about losing his creative director as well as his Louis Vuitton deal.
So the hurtful part was they agreed to support my clothing, and guess who was one of my designers? Virgil. Then they didn't do the deal.
They would also both go from success to success, Virgil with Off-White and Louis Vuitton, and Kanye with his Yeezy empire with Adidas, which would end up making him a billionaire in 2020. The same year, he would also strike a very lucrative deal with Gap, finally giving him the kind of creative leadership in fashion that he was promised years earlier. But keep it real, Gap ain't no Louis Vuitton. Then, after Virgil would pass away in November 2021, it would take even a year for Kanye's world to begin crumbling too, as his Twitter rants would bring an end to his partnerships with Adidas and Gap, and whatever was going on with Kanye, it would seemingly either change his feelings towards his old friend, or begin to finally bring out his true feelings towards Virgil that he had been bottling up all these years. And this would culminate in Ye's recent outbursts, as he would take to X on multiple occasions to air out his frustrations, saying, "Virgil let me down," and simply F Virgil. He would go on to drop the now infamous Betrayal list, where he put everyone from his own kids to former collaborators on blast, and sitting right at the very top of that list was Virgil's name. These outbursts would also continue on streams that Ye would do too. In another stream, the diss would get even darker.
Niggas who go against me be dead, bro. Niggas who steal from me, bro. Look at Virgil, he dead, bro. Who steal from me and try to take the king position, be dead, bro. Ah, man, I gotta use the bathroom. Where's Virgil's grave? Okay, so, oh my God. One of the people that Virgil, like, changed their lives is gonna come after you, so that means no one's coming after you.
And when asked about it in interviews, Kanye would double down with the story that we've now heard multiple times. The Louis Vuitton position was supposed to be his, that Virgil knew it, and just to twist the knife, that he went behind his back anyway. Now, whether Virgil actually betrayed Kanye maliciously or simply accepted an opportunity that had been handed to him is something that he took to the grave. But what's clear is that his decision to accept the job that had once been Kanye's dream left wounds that never healed. So where does this leave Virgil's legacy? Was he a visionary who democratized fashion and broke barriers for black designers, or was he an opportunistic copycat who built an empire off the back of other people's ideas? The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. Perhaps more than a revolutionary designer, Virgil was a master marketer who had a deep understanding of branding as a foundational element of fashion. He realized from early on that the power of fashion is all about the story that the clothes are able to tell. Therefore, he wasn't just designing clothes, but building cultural movements. And that approach took him very far, to the point that there's no denying Virgil's impact on the fashion industry. He not only helped break down the artificial barrier between streetwear and luxury, but he became arguably one of the most well-known contemporary fashion designers. And as the first black designer to lead a major European luxury house, he kicked down doors that had long been closed to people who looked like him. For many young designers of color, seeing Virgil at the helm of Louis Vuitton was revolutionary. It was proof that they too could aspire to fashion's highest echelons. But there's also no denying the questions about his originality and integrity. The long trail of stolen design elements is too substantial to ignore, and his 3% rule raises some serious ethical questions about creative ownership in an industry built on original ideas. And perhaps even worse, he managed to convince young designers that ripping off other people's designs was not just acceptable, but downright clever.
Everyone talks about Virgil. He has that 4% rule. You see something you like, you change it 4%. Do you live by that?
I live by that. I'm with Virgil, but I think I'm gonna do it better than Virgil because they call it a 2% rule. I call it take that shit.
So yeah, some might say branding him a straight up fraud is harsh, but there's no doubt that he played fast and loose with the concept of originality, relying on his charisma, connections, and marketing savvy to paper over the cracks in his design credentials. Virgil, at the end of the day, was a master marketer, a designer, and a fickle friend.